When my phone fell onto a battered, gray, once black floor, I glanced at the time, 2:23 in the morning. One of the perks of working the late shift is that after finishing work at midnight, I have my own space at the gym. If it wasn't for my habit of procrastinating and doing a lazy warm-up instead of getting started right away, I would have been there for half an hour. After putting a couple of weights on my neck, I ran across the cold, smooth surface of the gym floor and threw myself off. The familiar swaying motion, as I adjusted to the exercise, felt like the arms of an old friend. The old Smith simulator, abandoned by all, was my favorite among the machines. All the brand logos had long since been erased by the endless stream of sweaty bodies passing through. But it held a special place in my heart. Working out on it reminded me of the squeaky barbell in my father's garage where he once taught me how to lift. This brought back memories. Removing the barbell from the stop, I slowly lowered the weight until it barely touched my chest. And then, with an effortless squeeze, I pushed back, and the metal weight slid over the guides. Many people consider the night shift to be lonely and depressing, but I thrive when I can live in the independence that loneliness provides, especially in the gym, which is usually overflowing with sounds and smells from people pushing their bodies to the limit. During the day, the gym is a minefield of self-flagellating comparisons and distractions, but at night, it becomes a platform for me, and occasionally a few other singles. I've added a little extra weight and tried a new approach. It was challenging, but each repetition was done without hesitation. The buzz of fluorescent lights, whir of ventilation, and rhythmic motion of the barbell helped me enter a meditative state. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a sharp pain. With an unpleasant crunch, like the skin of a chicken, my right shoulder gave way under the steel of the oscillographic press that fell on me like a truck on ice. My left hand flinched, desperately trying to hold onto the weight. For a split second, I panicked. No matter how cliché it may seem, all my life flashed before my eyes. Most of all, I thought about my family's reaction. I could clearly see my parents, bride, and distant relatives standing at the gravestone with the words, "Desperate as an idiot," written on it. And even worse, if I were found by another gym member and laughed at as a corpse crushed under such a heavy weight, I would have died from shame if I were alive. Fortunately, I had enough strength to pull my hands away, despite the excruciating pain. I heard the vulture snap on the clamp and stab it right into my sternum. My heart was pounding, as if it were echoing against the cold steel. My breathing became intermittent and hoarse, and the pain left me feeling weak. Inside, there was a voice of reproach until my chest could fully expand due to the pressure. "You know you can't be reaped without insurance," the internal critic mumbled morally. I knew this was true, but my self-confidence overcame my sense of self-preservation. I believed the rotating hooks of the simulator would be reliable enough to get me through. Now, the weight pressing lightly against my skin convinced me otherwise. With my annoying voice, I started to climb my legs, moving the pelvis down the bench. Slowly and painfully, my chest slipped out of the steel grip. I sighed, feeling a warm pool of blood under my hoodie. The wooden cross had ripped off several layers of skin. When I recovered, I gritted my teeth and tried to pull my head out from under the barbell. But no matter how I twisted, the ear, jaw, or skull prevented me from escaping. Desperate, I cried out and kicked my feet like a stubborn child. The barbell hung in ominous silence, a few centimeters away from my open throat. Despite everything, I burst into an uncontrollable laugh. I knew I would survive, but the idea of being found in this position seemed ridiculous. So I was lying there, unable to reach my phone, with no one around. I was hoping that eventually, some other nightlight would come into the room and see my predicament. Dizziness, thirst, and loneliness overwhelmed me. The fluorescent lights felt like a scorching orange desert sun, ready to bleach my bones after a feast of vultures. To avoid thinking about my situation and how stupid I was, I closed my eyes and decided to wait for rescue. I was startled when I heard the door slam. "Hello!" I called out in a hoarse voice. "Help me!" There was the sound of creaking footsteps, and I, trapped in the blinding whiteness, began to offer some explanations. Quietly, I noticed the stranger stop just a meter away from my head and stand in silence. "Can you help me?" I asked. In response, the only sound that echoed was the ragged, hoarse breathing of the figure. I tried to turn around, but all I could see were my legs and torso, clad in long, black clothing. An ancient part of my brain told me to hide, and my breathing became panicked, matching the rapid breaths of the stranger. Suddenly, he rushed forward, grabbed a pancake from the nearest shelf, and I braced myself for a blow, but instead, I heard a familiar metallic click. The pancake had been placed on a vulture. It was with horror that I watched as a man, in a hood, greedily hung a disc behind another disc until the simulator's frame began to groan. I realized that he was going to crush me. The weight was already more than half a ton, and my neck was perfectly aligned with a modern guillotine. In despair, I tried my best to move my chin and face away from the crossbar, struggling to escape, and I yelled, praying for help. But the huge palm of his hand pressed my mouth shut, and the other turned the screw slowly. Of course, the murderer freed the bar from the clamp, and there was no doubt. He had no intention of helping. In a beastly rush, he pounded the log forearms together, sinking his teeth into the hard skin of his palms, feeling the metallic taste of blood. To my horror, he only clumsily laughed, mixing pain, effort, and excitement. I could feel sweat dripping down his unwashed skin, hear a rapid pulse in his wrists. This monster seemed to enjoy what was happening. Then, there was a click, and the weight began to press inexorably down. In the moment before the impending blow, I decided to perform a desperate maneuver. With my feet on the frame of the shop, I abruptly pulled my body to the left. As the rod fell, the shop collapsed. I collapsed into a metal structure with my face, the stars illuminating my eyes with fireworks and a warm fountain spouting from what remained of my nose. With a monstrous roar, the attacker crashed into the floor. However, due to the width of the pancakes and my position lying face down beneath the collapsed bench, death slipped by in centimeters. Not allowing myself to feel relieved, I jumped up and immediately hit my head against another part of the frame, causing a new galaxy of pain to flash before my eyes. After blinking, I realized that the attacker was gone. Thoughts raced through my mind. My skull split from fresh waves of agony. The phone had disappeared, and all my usual equipment had become an arsenal of traps. I walked slowly between the rows of exercise machines, feeling the vibrations of each step. The silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of my footsteps and the faint drizzle of sweat from my face. My right hand felt weak, each finger responding with a sharp pain to the slightest vibration, while my left hand held the weight above my head. Suddenly, I stopped in horror. The figure of the killer stood in front of me, silhouetted against the glass doors above the exit sign. I realized that he was at least 2 meters tall, and his shoulders were so wide that he would not fit through the normal doorway. His head was lowered and his surgical mask was melting on the floor. He was walking towards me, his fists clenched like oven-sized hammers. I took a step back, ready to run, when I noticed the corner of a sticker on the magnetically locked door, Safeguarding Systems LLC. Collecting the last of my strength, I waved and threw the 8-kilogram ball. The monster lowered his head and raised his hands in surprise at my desperate act, but the ball hit precisely, splitting the glass. Sirens echoed around the empty room. I knew help was on its way, and I watched as the figure froze, contemplating the situation. To my surprise, he simply turned around and walked out through the shattered doors, his massive shoulders slumping in disappointment. As the deafening thuds of his footsteps faded, I collapsed to my knees, losing consciousness from the pain. When I recounted the whole story to a bored, part-time cop at my bedside, it sounded much less frightening and mostly absurd. The attacker's DNA left at the scene did not match any records, and the case quickly went cold, settling into a dusty file. By the time I was released, I was told that further investigation was hopeless, but I was too relieved to be alive to care. Despite the damaged road simulator and the literally broken door, the gym offered me a lifetime membership as compensation for the near-fatal incident. However, knowing how many months of recovery I would need, I politely declined their offer. I think it's best for me to focus on my recovery and avoid any further risks. After all, weightlifting can be dangerous, and I need to take care of myself.